When Nathaniel Hayes looked across the mahogany table of the intense divorce deposition, he expected to see a broken woman. He expected tears, begging, and a quick settlement that would leave his wife, Nora, with nothing but the clothes on her back. After all, she was just a quiet kindergarten teacher he'd plucked from obscurity. Or so he thought. But the moment the courtroom doors swung open and 3 men in bespoke Italian suits walked in, carrying briefcases stamped with a family crest Nathaniel hadn't seen in a decade, the color drained from his face. He didn't realize he wasn't just divorcing a housewife, he was declaring war on an empire. This is the story of how one man's arrogance cost him everything. In the high society circles of Greenwich, Connecticut, appearances were the only currency that mattered. And to the outside world, Nathaniel and Nora Hayes were the gold standard. Nathaniel was the charismatic CEO of Hayes Venture Capital, a man who had turned a small inheritance into a multi-million-dollar portfolio through ruthless aggression and a lack of empathy that borders on clinical. Nora, on the other hand, was his perfect accessory. Quiet, blonde, always smiling, and utterly agreeable. Nathaniel often bragged to his associates at the country club, men like Garrison Ford and Timothy Bly, that he had molded Nora. "I found her teaching finger painting in a public school in Ohio," Nathaniel would laugh, swirling his scotch. "She didn't know the difference between a Pinot Noir and a Merlot until I taught her. She's sweet. But let's be honest, she's harmless. She'd be lost without me." The tragedy was that Nora seemed to believe it too. For 7 years, she played the part. She hosted the galas, she managed the staff at their sprawling estate on Round Hill Road, and she turned a blind eye to the lipstick stains on Nathaniel's collars. She was the dutiful wife, keeping her head down, seemingly terrified of rocking the boat. But the dynamic in the Hayes household had shifted in the last 6 months. Nathaniel had become brazen. He wasn't just hiding his affair with his 24-year-old PR director, Jessica Vane. He was practically flaunting it. It was a rainy Tuesday in November when the plan was hatched. Nathaniel sat in the plush leather office of Arthur Penhaligon, the most feared divorce attorney in the tri-state area. Penhaligon was a man who didn't just win cases, he destroyed lives. "The prenup is ironclad, Nathaniel," Penhaligon said, tapping a manicured finger on the document. "But we need to be careful. If she claims emotional distress or tries to fight for the Greenwich house, this could drag on. We need to break her spirit before we even step into a courtroom." Nathaniel scoffed, adjusting his cufflinks. "Break her spirit?" "Arthur, Nora doesn't have a spirit to break. She's soft. She has no family to speak of, just some estranged parents in the Midwest she never talks to. No savings. I control the accounts. I control the cars. I control the narrative." "And the assets?" Penhaligon asked. "Hidden." Nathaniel smiled cruelly. "I've moved the bulk of the liquidity into offshore accounts in the Caymans under shell companies she doesn't know exist. On paper, Hayes Venture is having a bad year. By the time we settle, I'll look like a pauper, and she'll be lucky to get a studio apartment in Bridgeport." Nathaniel leaned back, visualizing his future. He would cut Nora loose, move Jessica into the main house, and continue his ascent without the dead weight of a wife who bored him. He viewed Nora as a powerless entity, a piece of furniture he was tired of looking at. He had no idea that while he was plotting in a skyscraper office, Nora was sitting in her greenhouse, pruning orchids with surgical precision. Her phone buzzed. It was a text message, encrypted, from a number with a Swiss area code. "The transfer is complete. The trust is active. Are you ready to initiate?" Nora stared at the screen. The submissive, fearful look she wore around Nathaniel evaporated, replaced by a cold, steely gaze that would have terrified him. She typed back a single word. Wait. She wanted him to strike first. She needed him to feel safe, arrogant, and untouchable. Because the fall is always harder when you think you're flying. Nathaniel didn't just want a divorce. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted to signal to Jessica that he was entirely hers, and to his business rivals that he was a man who cut liabilities without mercy. He chose the Sterling Holloway Charity Ball as the venue for the ambush. It was the biggest event of the season, held at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan. Everyone who was anyone would be there. Senators, tech moguls, old money heirs. Nora wore a vintage emerald gown that night, looking stunning but understated. She clung to Nathaniel's arm as they entered the ballroom, her eyes darting around nervously. To Nathaniel, this nervousness looked like social anxiety. He squeezed her arm, a little too hard. "Try to smile, Nora," he hissed into her ear. "You look like a deer in headlights. It's embarrassing." "I'm sorry, Nathaniel," she whispered, lowering her eyes. I have a bad feeling." "You always have a bad feeling. Go get me a drink." He dismissed her and walked toward a group of investors. Jessica Vane was there, standing boldly near the bar in a dress that cost more than a mid-sized car, paid for by Nathaniel's corporate card. She winked at him. At 9 p.m., just as the main speeches were concluding, the music stopped. The double doors opened, and a process server, dressed in a cheap suit that clashed with the black tie crowd, walked directly onto the dance floor. He had clearly been paid extra to make a scene. The room went silent. The server walked up to Nora, who was standing near the chocolate fountain. "Eleanor Hayes," the man boomed. Nora froze. "Yes? You've been served." He slapped a thick envelope of legal documents into her chest. She instinctively grabbed them to keep them from falling. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers of, "Oh my God," and "Did you see that?" filled the air. Nathaniel stood nearby, feigning shock, but the smirk in his eyes was unmistakable. He walked over, playing the role of the exhausted husband, finally making a hard choice. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, Nora," Nathaniel said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "But I can't do this anymore. Our marriage has been over for a long time. I filed for divorce. I think it's best you leave." Nora stood there, trembling. The humiliation was absolute. Hundreds of eyes were boring into her. Jessica Vane was laughing behind her hand in the corner. "Nathaniel," Nora's voice wavered. "Here? Now? Why would you do this?" "Because you wouldn't listen," he lied smoothly. "I've cancelled your credit cards effective immediately, Nora. The driver will take you to a motel in Queens. I'll have your things sent over later in the week. Please don't make a scene." He was stripping her of her dignity, her home, and her resources in one fell swoop, in front of the very people she tried so hard to impress for him. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. She clutched the envelope, looked at Nathaniel, and then looked at the crowd. She turned and ran out of the ballroom, the sound of her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. Nathaniel turned back to the room, raising his hands in a gesture of apology. "My apologies, everyone. A private matter that unfortunately spilled over. Please, enjoy the champagne." The music resumed. Nathaniel felt invincible. He had won. He texted Arthur Penhaligon. "Done. She's out. She's got nothing." But outside, in the cool night air of Fifth Avenue, the trembling stopped. Nora stepped into the waiting town car, not the one Nathaniel paid for, but a sleek, armored black SUV that had pulled up silently to the curb. The driver, a large man with a scar on his cheek, opened the door for her. "Mrs. Sterling," the driver said, using a name she hadn't heard in 7 years. "Are you all right?" Nora wiped the fake tears from her cheeks with a silk handkerchief. Her posture straightened, the slump of the defeated housewife vanishing instantly. She looked back at the hotel, her eyes narrowing. "I'm fine, Kieran," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the breathless, airy quality she used with Nathaniel. It was now a voice of command. "He took the bait. He thinks I'm destitute." She pulled a burner phone from her clutch and dialed a number. "It's done," she said into the phone. "He served me publicly. He froze the joint accounts. He's claiming total financial dominance." A deep, gravelly voice on the other end responded. "Then he has triggered the clause. He has no idea who he just humiliated, does he, little bird?" "No, Uncle Silas," Nora replied, a cold smile touching her lips. "He thinks I'm Nora Hayes, the teacher from Ohio. He doesn't know he just declared war on the Caldwell-Sterling banking dynasty." "We will be in New York by morning," the voice promised. "Tell the lawyers to prepare the red file. We aren't just going for alimony, Nora. We are coming for the company." Nora hung up and looked out the window as the city lights blurred by. Nathaniel had wanted a show. He had wanted to prove he was the powerful one. He had forgotten the first rule of power. True power doesn't need to shout. "Take me to the penthouse," Nora told the driver. "And Kieran, get me the file on Jessica Vane. If she wants to play in the big leagues, let's see if she can handle the pressure." Back in the ballroom, Nathaniel was toasting with champagne, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already crumbled. The wife he thought was powerless was about to unleash a storm that would make the Great Recession look like a minor accounting error. For 3 days following the public humiliation at the Pierre Hotel, there was absolute silence from Nora. To Nathaniel Hayes, this silence was the sweet sound of victory. He spent the weekend moving Jessica Vane into the Greenwich estate. He watched with a glass of 18-year-old scotch in hand as movers packed Nora's modest wardrobe, department store dresses, sensible coats, the few pieces of jewelry he had gifted her that weren't insured, into cardboard boxes. He instructed the staff to leave them at the gatehouse for pickup. "She's probably crying in a motel in Queens," Nathaniel laughed, kicking his feet up on the ottoman in the master bedroom. Jessica was busy hanging her designer clothes in the walk-in closet, shoving Nora's remaining hangers aside. "Do you think she'll fight the prenup?" Jessica asked, examining a diamond tennis bracelet she had found in a drawer. "This is cute. Can I keep it?" "Keep it. She won't fight," Nathaniel sneered. "Nora hates conflict. She shakes if a waiter gets her order wrong. Facing Arthur Penhaligon in court, she'd rather die. She'll take the $20,000 severance I offered and disappear." But Arthur Penhaligon wasn't as relaxed as his client. In his midtown office, Arthur stared at the phone. He had sent the filing to the address Nathaniel provided, a P.O. box Nora had set up years ago. But there was no response, no angry phone call from a cut-rate lawyer, no sobbing pleas for reconciliation, no media leaks. Silence in a high-profile divorce usually meant one of two things: capitulation or preparation. Arthur assumed the former, but a nagging instinct in his gut made him check the court docket every hour. "You're paranoid, Arthur," Nathaniel told him over the phone on Monday morning. "She's a kindergarten teacher from Ohio, whose father was a corn farmer. She doesn't have the resources to mount a defense." Nathaniel was right about one thing. Nora's father had been a farmer. What Nathaniel didn't know, because he had never bothered to ask about Nora's mother, was that her mother wasn't a nobody. Her mother was Cecilia Sterling, the rebellious daughter of the Sterling banking empire who had run away from her fortune for love. Nora had been raised in humble cornfields, yes, but upon her parents' passing in a car accident 7 years prior, just months before she met Nathaniel, she had inherited a legacy that had been held in trust since her birth. She had kept it secret, wanting to be loved for herself, not her billions. She had met Nathaniel, fell in love, and decided to live the simple life he seemed to offer. She had played the role of the simple wife because she wanted a simple life. But Nathaniel had mistaken her humility for weakness. While Nathaniel was redecorating, Nora was sitting in the library of the penthouse suite at the Plaza Hotel. The room was swept for bugs twice a day. The windows were bulletproof. Sitting across from her was Kieran, her head of security, and a man named Silas Caldwell. Silas was 60 years old, with silver hair slicked back and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He was Nora's uncle on her mother's side, and the current patriarch of the Sterling Caldwell Trust. He controlled assets that could buy and sell Nathaniel's venture capital firm 12 times over before breakfast. "The forensic team has finished the preliminary sweep of Nathaniel's dealings," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. He slid a black folder across the mahogany desk. Nora didn't open it. She just stared at the leather cover. She was no longer wearing the floral prints Nathaniel liked. She wore a sharp, tailored black suit by Alexander McQueen. Her hair, usually loose and messy, was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. "How bad is it?" Nora asked. "He's not just cheating on you, Eleanor," Silas said, using her birth name. "He's cheating the IRS, his investors, and he's been leveraging your joint status to launder money through a shell company in Panama. He thinks he hid the assets from the divorce court. In reality, he's created a paper trail that could send him to federal prison for 20 years. Nora's fingers traced the edge of the folder. "He treated me like I was stupid, Uncle Silas. He used to explain simple economics to me at dinner parties to make his friends laugh." "Arrogance is a powerful anesthetic," Silas replied, pouring himself a water. "It numbs you to reality. He thinks he is fighting a mouse. He does not know he has stepped into a cage with a lion." "I don't want him in prison yet," Nora said softly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I want him to feel it. I want him to watch his world dismantle piece by piece. I want him to know it was me." The heavy oak doors of the library opened. A third man entered. He was younger than Silas, perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a suit that cost more than Nathaniel's car. This was Sebastian Thorne, the family's fixer and lead litigator for the firm of Thorne, Blackwood, and Cross. He didn't handle divorces. He handled corporate hostile takeovers and international disputes. "The court date is set for the preliminary hearing on Thursday," Sebastian announced, checking his platinum watch. "Penhaligon has filed a motion for an emergency freeze on your assets, assuming you might try to flee with the silverware. He's also filed a motion to ban you from the marital residence." Nora stood up and walked to the window, looking down at Central Park. "Let him have the residence. It's mortgaged to the hilt anyway." "What about the team?" "We are ready," Sebastian said. "But Eleanor, are you sure you want to do this in person? We can represent you. You don't have to see him." Nora turned around. Her eyes were dry, clear, and burning with a cold fire. "Oh, I have to see him, Sebastian. I need to see the look on his face when he realizes that the doll he broke owns the toy store." Thursday morning arrived with a grey, drizzling sky that blanketed Manhattan in gloom. The location for the preliminary deposition was the conference room of Arthur Penhaligon's firm on the 40th floor of a Wall Street skyscraper. Nathaniel Hayes arrived 20 minutes late, smelling of expensive cologne and overconfidence. He walked into the conference room, threw his coat on a chair, and high-fived Arthur. "Any sign of her?" Nathaniel asked, checking his reflection in the glass window. "Not yet," Arthur said, frowning. He was arranging his papers. "We've received no notification of counsel. Nathaniel, if she shows up pro se, without a lawyer, the judge will likely grant a continuance. It's annoying, She's probably terrified, Nathaniel scoffed. She's likely trying to find parking for that old Honda I let her keep. Let's just get this over with. I have a tea time at 1. The clock on the wall ticked to 10:06 a.m. Then 10:05 a.m. She's not coming, Nathaniel smirked. Default judgment. We win. Arthur was about to agree when the receptionist buzzed the intercom. Her voice sounded breathless, shaken. Mr. Penhaligon, your guests are here. Send Mrs. Hayes in, Arthur commanded, annoyed. It's not just Mrs. Hayes, sir. They're coming up now. I couldn't stop them. Nathaniel frowned. Couldn't stop them? Who is them? The elevator dinged down the hall. It wasn't the usual soft chime. It sounded like a warning bell. Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor, not the scuff of a single nervous woman, but the rhythmic, confident stride of a group. The glass doors of the conference room didn't just open. They were held open by 2 large men in dark suits with earpieces. Kieran's security team. Nathaniel stood up, indignant. Who the hell are you? You can't just barge in here. Then Nora walked in. Nathaniel's mouth opened to speak, but the words died in his throat. This wasn't the woman he had kicked out of the Pierre Hotel. That woman wore department store sales items and hunched her shoulders. This woman was wearing a cream-colored Chanel power suit that fitted her like a second skin. Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek, sharp bob. On her wrist sat a Vacheron Constantin watch encrusted with diamonds, a piece worth $250,000. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They held a look of bored disdain, the way a queen looks at a peasant who has stepped on her train. She didn't look at Nathaniel. She walked to the head of the table opposite Arthur and sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. Nora? Nathaniel whispered, confused by the visual disconnect. Where did you get? He was cut off as the rest of the entourage entered. First came Sebastian Thorne, carrying a leather briefcase stamped with gold initials. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud. Then came Silas Caldwell. The moment Arthur Penhaligon saw Silas, the blood drained from the lawyer's face. Arthur knew the players in New York. He knew who the sharks were, and he knew that Silas Caldwell wasn't a shark. He was the leviathan that sharks swam away from. Arthur scrambled to his feet, his hand trembling slightly. Mr. Caldwell, I wasn't aware you were involved in this matter. Silas didn't shake the offered hand. He merely looked at Arthur until the lawyer slowly lowered his arm. I am always involved when someone attempts to defraud a member of my family, Mr. Penhaligon. Nathaniel looked between them, agitated. Arthur? Who is this guy? Why is he sitting with Nora? Arthur turned to his client, his voice hissing with urgency. Nathaniel, shut up. That is Silas Caldwell. He runs the Sterling Trust. So? Nathaniel snapped, though his confidence was wavering. What does a banker have to do with my wife? Nora finally spoke. Her voice was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly clear. He's my uncle, Nathaniel. The room went dead silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to roar. Nathaniel blinked. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Your uncle? Nora, stop it. Your uncle is a corn farmer named Jim. I met him at the wedding. He wore a rented tuxedo. Jim was my father's brother, Nora said, examining her manicured fingernails. He is a lovely man. Silas is my mother's brother. You never asked about my mother, Nathaniel. In 7 years, you never once asked her maiden name. You were too busy talking about yourself. Sebastian Thorne unclicked the latches of his briefcase. The sound was like 2 pistol shots in the quiet room. He slid a single, thick document across the table toward Arthur. What is this? Arthur asked, his voice weak. That? Sebastian said, "is a response to your divorce filing. We are countersuing, but not for alimony." Arthur opened the file. His eyes widened as he scanned the first page. He flipped the page, then another, his face growing paler by the second. This is impossible," Arthur stammered. "You're freezing his assets. You can't do that. We control the liquidity." "We did freeze his assets," Sebastian corrected. "An hour ago. A judge signed the order based on evidence of massive embezzlement, tax fraud, and violation of the RICO Act." Nathaniel slammed his hand on the table. "Bullshit! I have accounts in the Caymans you people don't even know about. You can't touch me." Silas Caldwell leaned forward. For the first time, he smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Mr. Hayes," Silas rumbled, "who do you think owns the bank in the Caymans where you hid your money?" Nathaniel froze. "The Caldwell Sterling Group acquired the majority stake in the First Royal Bank of the Caymans 4 months ago," Silas continued. "We flagged your accounts for suspicious activity the moment you made the transfer last Tuesday. We have every transaction. We have the emails to your mistress discussing how to hide the funds. We have it all." Nora leaned forward, mirroring her uncle's posture. She locked eyes with her husband. "You wanted to leave me with nothing, Nathaniel," she said softly. "You wanted to break me. But you forgot one thing. I didn't marry you for your money. I had my own. I married you because I loved you. And now that the love is gone," she gestured around the room, "I'm just a bored billionaire with a very good legal team and a lot of free time." Arthur Penhaligon closed the folder. He looked at Nathaniel with the eyes of a man watching a sinking ship. "Nathaniel," Arthur whispered, "we need to talk. Alone. Now." "No," Nora interrupted. She stood up. "No talking. This deposition is over. We aren't here to negotiate a settlement, Arthur. We are here to inform you that we are initiating a forensic audit of Hayes Venture Capital dating back 10 years. By the time we are done, Nathaniel won't just be divorced. He will be destitute." She turned to leave, her heels clicking on the floor with rhythmic precision. At the door, she paused and looked back at her husband, who was slumped in his chair, looking small, pale, and utterly defeated. "Oh, and Nathaniel," Nora added, "I'm cancelling your country club membership. My grandfather founded that club. They don't allow insolvent members." She walked out, followed by her uncle and the lawyers, leaving Nathaniel Hayes sitting in the ruins of his life, wondering how the woman he thought was a helpless lamb had just torn out his throat. The silence in Arthur Penhaligon's conference room after Nora's exit was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a bomb blast, where the ringing in the ears is the only sound that registers. Nathaniel Hayes sat slumped in the ergonomic leather chair, his face a mask of grey shock. He looked at the empty doorway, where his wife, or the entity he used to call his wife, had just stood. He tried to reconcile the image of the woman who used to knit blankets on the couch with the titan of industry who had just threatened to dismantle his existence. "Arthur," Nathaniel croaked, his voice sounding thin and pathetic. "Fix this. Call the judge. Call someone. Tell them it's a mistake. She's bluffing. The Sterling family? It's insane. She's making it up." Arthur Penhaligon didn't answer immediately. He was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked streets of Wall Street. He slowly began packing his expensive fountain pen into his briefcase. "Arthur," Nathaniel shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. "Did you hear me?" Arthur turned around. His face was devoid of the shark-like sympathy he usually offered his wealthy clients. Now, it was just cold business. "Nathaniel," Arthur said quietly, Do you know what the Thorne, Blackwood and Cross law firm charges per hour? I don't care. I pay you to care. They don't bill by the hour, Arthur corrected him. They bill by the victory. They only take cases they have already won before they walk in the door. Sebastian Thorne hasn't lost a corporate litigation case in 19 years. If he is sitting at this table, it means you are already dead. You just haven't fallen over yet. So you're giving up? Nathaniel stood up, his face flushing red. I'll find another lawyer. I'll sue you for malpractice. You won't be able to afford another lawyer, Arthur said, snapping his briefcase shut. And you certainly can't afford me anymore. My retainer requires liquid assets. As of 40 minutes ago, you don't have any. Arthur walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. I'll have my secretary forward your file to your home address. Do not contact this office again, unless it is to settle your outstanding bill. Good luck, Nathaniel. You're going to need it. Arthur walked out, leaving Nathaniel alone in the glass room. Nathaniel grabbed his coat and stormed out of the building. He needed to get to his office. He needed to get to Hayes Venture Capital. He needed to move the money from the secondary accounts before the freeze propagated through the banking system. He pulled out his phone to call his CFO, Greg Manson, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. He hailed a cab, his hands shaking so badly he could barely close the door. Midtown, 42nd and Park. Drive fast. When the cab pulled up to the gleaming steel tower that housed his firm, Nathaniel threw a credit card at the driver. The driver swiped it. He frowned. He swiped it again. Cards declined, buddy, the driver said, looking in the rearview mirror. That's impossible, Nathaniel snapped. It's a black card. It has no limit. Run it again. I ran it 3 times. It says, refer to issuer, do not honor. You got cash? Nathaniel patted his pockets frantically. He never carried cash. He lived in a world of digital transactions and credit. He finally found a crumpled $20 bill in his coat pocket, emergency valet tip money, and threw it at the driver, scrambling out onto the sidewalk. He ran into the lobby, ignoring the security guard, and headed for the elevators. He swiped his executive pass card. The light on the panel blinked angry red. Access denied. Mr. Hayes. Nathaniel spun around. 2 men in windbreakers were standing by the front desk. They had the distinct, unimpressed look of federal employees. Behind them stood Greg Manson, his CFO, looking pale and handcuffed. Who are you? Nathaniel demanded, his heart hammering against his ribs. Special Agent Miller, FBI, Financial Crimes Division, the taller man said, flashing a badge. And these constitute a team from the SEC. We're executing a search warrant for the premises of Hayes Venture Capital regarding allegations of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Nathaniel looked at Greg. Greg looked at the floor. Nathaniel, Greg whispered, they have the emails. They have the server logs from the Panama Shell Corp. They knew the passwords, Nathaniel. They knew the exact passwords. The realization hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. Nora. She hadn't just been pruning flowers in the greenhouse all those years. She had been watching. She had access to his home office. She knew his passcodes. She had played the fool so perfectly that he had gotten sloppy, leaving his digital life open to her silent scrutiny. Am I under arrest? Nathaniel asked, his voice trembling. Not yet, Agent Miller said calmly. We're just seizing assets and evidence today. But I wouldn't leave town, Mr. Hayes. We've flagged your passport. Nathaniel backed away, then turned and ran out of the lobby, back into the rain. He had no office. He had no accounts. He had no lawyer. He had to get home. He had to get to Jessica. She was smart. She was in PR. She would know how to spin this. They could sell the jewelry, sell the art. They could survive this. He didn't realize that the woman waiting for him at home wasn't a partner. She was a parasite. And the host was dying. The drive back to Greenwich took 2 hours in a hired Uber that Nathaniel had to link to a dormant PayPal account he hadn't used in years. By the time he arrived at the wrought iron gates of his estate, the sky was pitch black. The house was dark. This was unusual. Jessica usually had the lights blazing, music playing, the place alive with the energy she claimed Nora never had. Nathaniel punched the code into the gate. It opened slowly, groaning as if the mechanism was tired. He walked up the driveway, the rain soaking his Italian wool suit. He unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. "Jessica," he called out. "Jess, are you here?" Silence. He walked into the living room. The furniture was there, but something felt wrong. The atmosphere was sterile. He flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. "Damn it," he muttered. "Power outage." He used his phone flashlight to navigate to the kitchen. The digital clock on the oven was blank. The refrigerator was silent. The power had been cut. "Jessica!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. He ran upstairs to the master bedroom. The door was open. He shone the light into the room. The closets were open, and they were empty. Not just empty of Jessica's clothes. Everything was gone. Her Louis Vuitton luggage, the furs he had bought her, the jewelry box from the vanity. But it wasn't just her things. Nathaniel swept the light across the room. His watch collection, 6 Rolexes and a Patek Philippe he kept in a winder on the dresser, was gone. The safe in the wall was open, the keypad smashed, the emergency cash and gold coins he kept there for apocalypse scenarios vanished. She hadn't just left. She had looted him. His phone buzzed, a text message. It was from Jessica. Saw the news about the raid on Twitter. And the freeze order. "I can't do prison, Nathaniel, and I can't do poverty. Don't come looking for me. The Watchers should cover my severance package." Jay. Nathaniel sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from his fingers. He sat in the dark, in the cold house that he had fought so hard to keep from Nora. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. The next morning brought a new kind of humiliation. Nathaniel woke up shivering. The heating was off, and the November chill had settled into the bones of the house. He wandered downstairs, hungry, but the fridge contained only a bottle of flat tonic water and a jar of olives. A heavy pounding on the front door made him jump. He opened it to find a man in a jumpsuit, holding a clipboard, a tow truck idling in the driveway behind him. "Nathaniel Hayes?" the man asked. "Yes. What is this?" "Repo order for the Mercedes S-Class and the Range Rover," the man said, not making eye contact. "Lease payments are 3 months overdue, and the bank called in the note this morning, due to insolvency risk." "Keys, please." "You can't take my cars," Nathaniel screamed, losing the last shred of his composure. "I am Nathaniel Hayes. I am the CEO of—" "Look, buddy," the man sighed. "I just drive the truck. Keys, or we drag 'em out and ruin the transmission. Your call." Nathaniel threw the keys into the gravel driveway. He watched as the trucks hooked up the symbols of his status and dragged them away. He stood in the driveway, watching them disappear down the road. As he turned to go back inside, a black SUV, the same armored vehicle from the Pierre Hotel, slowed to a stop at the gate. The window rolled down. It wasn't Nora. It was Sebastian Thorne, the lawyer. Nathaniel walked down the driveway, barefoot on the cold asphalt. He looked like a ghost of the man he was yesterday. His shirt was wrinkled, his stubble was showing, and his eyes were wild. "What do you want?" Nathaniel rasped. "You've taken the money. You've taken the company. You've taken the house. What else is there?" Sebastian didn't get out of the car. He simply held up a piece of paper. "Nora wanted me to give you this," Sebastian said calmly. "It's a settlement offer." Nathaniel's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "A settlement? She wants to settle? Read it." Nathaniel took the paper. His hand shook as he read the single paragraph. "Mr. Hayes agrees to sign a full confession regarding the embezzlement scheme at Hayes Venture Capital, implicating himself and exonerating all junior staff members. He agrees to transfer the deed of the Greenwich estate to the Sterling Trust immediately. In exchange, the Sterling Trust agrees not to press charges for the theft of Eleanor Sterling's personal inheritance and will provide Mr. Hayes with a one-way bus ticket to Ohio and a check for $5,000 to start over." Nathaniel stared at the paper. $5,000? Is this a joke? I made $5,000 before lunch. "That was yesterday," Sebastian said coldly. "Today you have negative $11 million in liabilities. This is a lifeline, Nathaniel. Nora is giving you a chance to stay out of federal prison. The FBI is building their case, but if you confess and cooperate and pay restitution with the liquidation of the house, our contacts at the DOJ say you might get off with probation and a ban from trading. And if I refuse?" Sebastian put his sunglasses back on. "Then we hand over the black ledger, the one regarding your dealings with the cartels in Mexico, to wash their cash. We found that this morning. If that gets out, prison will be the least of your worries." Nathaniel's knees buckled. He grabbed the gate for support. They knew everything. Every dirty secret, every cut corner, every illegal handshake. "Why?" Nathaniel whispered. "Why is she doing this? I just wanted a divorce." "No," Sebastian corrected him. "You wanted to destroy her. You wanted to humiliate her. You mistook kindness for weakness, Mr. Hayes. It is a common mistake among men like you." Sebastian reached out a hand. "The pen is in the clip. Sign it, and the bus ticket is yours. Refuse, and the FBI vans will be back within the hour." Nathaniel looked at the house, the mansion he had used to prove he was better than everyone else. He looked at the empty driveway. He looked at the grey sky. He realized then that he never really owned any of it. He was just playing a character, and the show had been cancelled. He took the pen. He signed the paper against the cold metal of the car door. "Smart choice," Sebastian said, taking the paper back. He handed Nathaniel an envelope containing a Greyhound ticket and a cashier's check. "Goodbye, Nathaniel. Nora said to tell you one last thing." "What?" Nathaniel asked, tears finally spilling over. "She said, 'Don't worry about the orchids in the greenhouse. I'm having them moved to a place where they can actually breathe.'" The window rolled up. The SUV drove away. Nathaniel Hayes stood alone at the gate of a house he no longer owned, holding a ticket to Ohio, listening to the wind howl through the trees. He had thought his wife was powerless. He had thought she was nothing. He was finally beginning to understand that she was the storm, and he was just the debris left in her wake. The Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan was a purgatory of fluorescent lights, scuffed linoleum, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with diesel fumes. It was a place Nathaniel Hayes had never set foot in, not even when he was 22 and hungry. He had always believed he was too good for places like this. Now, sitting on a hard plastic bench with a single duffel bag at his feet, he realized the universe had a cruel sense of irony. He wore a hoodie he had bought at a discount store and a pair of jeans that didn't fit quite right. The tailored Italian suits were gone, left hanging in the closet of a house that now belonged to the Sterling Trust. The Patek Philippe was gone, stolen by a woman he thought he could control. He looked down at the ticket in his hand. New York to Columbus, Ohio. One way. Bus 404 to Columbus. Boarding at gate 12, the intercom crackled. Nathaniel stood up. His legs felt heavy. He walked toward the gate, shuffling in line behind a young mother with a crying baby and an elderly man coughing into a handkerchief. He was anonymous here. No one cared about his ROI strategies. No one cared about his Cayman accounts. To the people in this line, he was just another middle-aged man who looked like life had chewed him up and spat him out. He handed his ticket to the driver. The driver didn't even look at his face. "Move back. Find a seat." As the bus pulled out of the terminal and merged into the tunnel traffic, Nathaniel pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He watched the skyline of Manhattan recede, the city of lights, the city where he had been a king, if only for a fleeting moment. He thought about Nora, not the Eleanor Sterling who commanded boardrooms, but the Nora he had come home to for 7 years. The woman who made him tea when he had the flu. The woman who listened to his rants about incompetence at the office with patient, soft eyes. He had despised that softness. He had called it weakness. As the bus hit the highway, heading west into the darkness, the crushing weight of the truth finally settled on his chest. That softness hadn't been weakness. It had been mercy. She had been holding back her power to let him shine. She had dimmed her own light so he wouldn't feel overshadowed. And in return, he had tried to extinguish her completely. 6 months later. The winter in Ohio was harsher than Nathaniel remembered. He was working the night shift at a logistics warehouse, driving a forklift. It was mind-numbing work, physically exhausting, and it paid just enough to cover the rent on his basement apartment and the heating bill. He was on his lunch break, sitting in the break room, eating a sandwich wrapped in foil. The television in the corner was tuned to a national news channel. "Turn it up, will ya?" one of the other workers grunted. "This is the segment on the children's hospital." Nathaniel didn't look up. He kept his eyes on his sandwich. And finally tonight, the news anchor's voice boomed, a historic donation to the New York Arts Foundation and a massive expansion of the inner-city school grant program. Nathaniel chewed slowly. The initiative is being spearheaded by the newly appointed chairwoman of the Sterling Trust, Eleanor Sterling, who has returned to public life after a long hiatus. Nathaniel stopped chewing. He slowly lifted his head. There she was. She was standing at a podium in front of a crowd of flashing cameras. She looked radiant. She wasn't wearing the severe black suit from the deposition. She was wearing a soft white dress, her hair loose and waving slightly. She looked younger, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Next to her stood Silas Caldwell, looking proud. A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Sterling, after years of privacy, what made you decide to take such a public role in the foundation now?" On the grainy breakroom TV, Nora smiled. It was the smile he used to fall in love with, but there was a steeliness behind it now that he recognized. "I spent a long time thinking that my value lay in being small," Nora said, her voice clear and confident. "I thought that if I made myself quiet, I would find peace. But I learned that peace doesn't come from hiding who you are. It comes from standing in your truth. And sometimes you have to burn down the old life to build a new one." The camera zoomed in on her face. "I'm doing this for the women who think they have no voice," she continued. "I want them to know that kindness is not a lack of power. It is the greatest power. And when it is abused, well, let's just say the consequences can be educational." The break room erupted in murmurs of approval. "She's a class act," one of the guys said. "Look at that money. She could buy this whole state." Nathaniel stared at the screen until the segment ended. "Hey, Hayes," his supervisor yelled from the doorway. "Break's over. Get back on the loader. Pallets won't move themselves." Nathaniel crumpled the foil wrapper into a ball. He looked at the black screen where his wife's face had just been. "I knew her," Nathaniel whispered, so quietly no one could hear him. "What did you say, Hayes?" Nathaniel stood up, pushing his chair back. He felt the ache in his lower back, the exhaustion in his bones. He looked at his rough, calloused hands, hands that used to sign million-dollar checks, now stained with grease and dust. "I said," Nathaniel replied, his voice flat and resigned. "I used to know someone like that. A long time ago." He turned and walked back toward the warehouse floor, the heavy steel-toed boots dragging on the concrete. Back in New York, Eleanor Sterling walked off the stage. Kieran, her head of security, was waiting with a bottle of water. "You were excellent, Ms. Sterling," Kieran said. "Thank you, Kieran." She took a sip. "Any word on the other matter?" "Yes, ma'am," Kieran said, opening the door to the waiting limousine. "Jessica Vane was apprehended in Miami yesterday, trying to pawn a Patek Philippe without papers, grand larceny charges. She's looking at 5 to 7 years. Eleanor nodded. There was no joy in her face, just a sense of balance restored. "And him?" she asked, looking out at the city lights. "He's in Columbus," Kieran replied, "working, paying taxes, living a quiet life. We haven't seen any trouble." Eleanor watched the city pass by, the city she now helped shape. She thought of Nathaniel, alone in the cold, living the humble life she had once pretended to have. She hoped, for his sake, he would eventually find the contentment in simplicity that he had denied her. "Let him be," Eleanor said softly, closing the partition. "He's in the only prison that matters now." "Which is?" Kieran asked. "His memory," she replied. "He has to remember every day what he threw away." The car merged into traffic, disappearing into the stream of red taillights, carrying the woman who had once been a powerless wife toward a future that was entirely, magnificently, her own. Nathaniel Hayes learned the hard way that you should never mistake silence for submission. He spent years building a house of cards on the foundation of his own arrogance, believing he was the master of his universe. But in the end, the simple teacher he tried to discard was the one holding the deck. He lost his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom, not because Nora was vindictive, but because he forced her hand. Nora proved that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. It doesn't need to belittle others to feel big. It sits quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Nathaniel is now living the life he once mocked, haunted by the ghost of the woman he underestimated, while Nora uses her power to lift others up. It is the ultimate justice. He is forgotten, and she is finally free. Wow, what a journey. I honestly got chills when Nora walked into that deposition room. It just goes to show that you never truly know who you are dealing with, and treating people with kindness is always the best policy. What do you think? Did Nathaniel deserve a harsher punishment, or is living with regret the worst punishment of all? And what about Jessica? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a discussion going. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on, because they might just own the ground you're standing on. See you in the next video.